Good day, my fellow Americans and good people of the world. My name is Cassandra Rosa, and this is my introduction to a concept that I believe will be fundamental to transforming America into a new pathway moving forward, one that will help to establish a strengthening of our union, one that right now is apparently necessary more than ever. And that is the distinguishment of in a new branch of government. So as follows, the current system of the United States government consists of three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. Now I have come to determine that there are two unofficial branches of the government: civics and free press. While free press must always remain unofficial and separate from government so it can ethically inform citizens and hold leaders to account, civics is a branch of government that has the potential to become the official fourth branch. Now, civics has the potential to bring the American people into the involvements of government, to foster self-governance while ensuring that policies directly reflect the will of the people in a way which aligns with the collective governance while holding representative government to account. Now, civics is a branch of government that has the potential to become the official fourth branch because it is a way to make sure that the policies which reflect the will of the people aligns with the collective governance while holding the representatives to account is a way to create a pathway which weeds out corruption. Now, the fourth branch of government will make representation expansive, establishing a model of balanced governance, likened to manning a vessel fit for sailing. Now, the Senate in Congress is the just right anchor of tradition, keeping us steeped in tradition and grounded in a narrow tailoring to fulfill continuity and government intent. The House in Congress is the broad sail, pivotal to catch the winds of change as they come, to compel the government interest to take new things into account, and to admit intent to activate change. Now, civics, which gets all hands on the populated crew on deck to share communal responsibility in keeping the ship afloat with integrity and shared responsibility in participation and contribution to the national identity. Judicial is the instrumental compass, navigating confidently on the waters of precision applicability of law to ascertain the present position and determine the direction and the progress to which law applied will bring us to arrive at the intended destination of equality under the law, performing fair, reasonable, just, and good outcomes. Then, a trustworthy leader at the helm as captain, the consequential executive that has a personally developed and time-tested capacity for effective and independent anti-corruption action. The type of trustworthy leader who has stable understanding of jurisprudence, a sense of individual and representational jurisdiction, a reasonable understanding of just law, innate qualities of temperance and prudence, and the ever-important virtue of patience. This model of commander represents one who understands the people and the politics and the government systems. Finally, and unofficially, that leaves the free press, journalism, to contextualize figuratively the shape of the ship and its seaworthiness and its cargo and how well the ship is sailed and any indications of mutiny or corruption. Doing that so that the crew, the passengers, and the merchants and even other sovereign governing vessels can understand what they are getting into or being involved with in regards to the ship. One of my favorite quotes that puts this into an honest perspective comes from Sir Thomas More, the author of Utopia. "You wouldn't abandon ship in a storm just because you couldn't control the winds." Now, in making the case for the official inclusion of a fourth branch of civics and the recognition of the necessity of an unofficial fifth branch in the form of journalistic, integrity-bound free press, there is already constitutional precedence for free press assembly, association, and expression in the First Amendment, and the justifications for giving official governing power to the people is found in the language of the 9th and the 10th Amendment. Now, the legal significance of the 10th Amendment is that all is retained which is not surrendered. So the people can reserve their powers in the authority of a civics branch to exercise fully their reserved power in a way that is sound in principle and practice of government. Now, the Constitution of the United States established and legitimizes the necessity for the separation of powers, resulting in the three-branch system, which has carried America over, 247 years, sustaining the nation through unconditional executive, legislative, and judicial branches. Now, in these modern times, though, America is due for a revolutionary constitutional act befit the needs of now to establish the fourth branch, civics. The principal keystone to the United States of America's founding was the placement of the ultimate powers in the people. Now is the time for a true democratization of power to govern, so that the common people can exercise their rights and their will, so the outcomes of America reflect the actual shifts in the needs and the demographies over time. Now, the people need more power than just voting, organizing protest, lobbying legislators, and suing so America does right by its people. They need means to hold government accountable and responsible to their duties so that there is enforceable consequences when they fail in that duty. And it means to ensure that government power is not harnessed and weaponized to wield sordid representative interests going against the interests of the public good. Now, the people also require legitimate standing to claim the powers of self-government over their sovereign autonomous personhood and their sovereign household, just as a state and local governments are insulary, protecting the interests of the people from the overreaching of federal government and state government. The people need personal, insulary protections from intrusions from all branches of government. There is power being taken away from the people by representative politicians targeting performance-based outcomes that answer only to their party agendas and providing for their personal ambitions above all else. These sort of politicians are making decisions that are immediately affecting the lives of people and continue to impact them over time. These representatives are so far removed from understanding the people whom their decisions are determining the fate of. That through policy, blind policy, ignorant policy, in terms of the actual individual hopes and dreams, struggles and necessities of the people, all which are invisible implications when we remove rights through representational government. Now, there is no common sense nor justified basis to liberal, conservative, progressive, or ideologies that wield powers capable of consequence, which would, by law, destroy the individual and strip the substance of their lives, denying them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It is because no single political theory can provide a system suitable for all cases that individuals should have the most power to wield in decision-making when it comes to the outcomes of their individual lives. When the power to decide is taken out of the hands of individuals and then placed in the hands of a representative government, the representatives who have a hand in the decision-making have their hands too full to help with keeping the ship of a failing state afloat. Now, at the end of the day, these representational politicians are just too busy with trying to pull strings and leverage PR opportunities in ways that garner the most mainstream media attention so that they can gain clout for re-election platitudes and to banner their slogans. Meanwhile, the people are drowning in the substance of repeated government failures. And if the people had the power to do things themselves, to secure resilience and self-reliance, then things could have been handled correctly before it turned into crisis and then became a concern of survival and loss for themselves and for others. Now, there is a saying from some religious text that finally sums up the matter at hand. Give us the power over the one city which we must govern, ourselves. This is the same reason why the Second Amendment, 2A, is about providing for the common defense. The right to bear arms is the right to defend yourself and your home and your family from would-be invaders who could disturb your peaceful home. We must have the power to protect and serve ourselves in case no one else can do it for us but us when it's needed. When we need protection, we have to be able to protect ourselves. Self-reliance also means self-preservation. America touts itself as the home of the self-reliant. Well, this is increasingly becoming an illusion, guised by optics that would have everyone believe that everything's just fine, when in fact, things are sketchy at best. Debt serfdom, corporate monopolies, government overreach, an inflating economy and faltering standing in the international community, unabated illegal immigration, growing government spending in a way that ransoms everyone's future, runaway hikes in cost of living, which create a whole new identity of teetering impoverishment, pervading and threatening every economic class. Not to forget the fact that polarization intensifies by culture wars, which have dismantled equality initiatives and is tearing families apart by ideologies, and etc. In the most general and clear sense, 2A is about self-preservation in an unpredictable world, and so will be the constitutionally sanctioned civics branch of government. What could not have been possible at the time of the founding of the United States of America was a civics branch. Now, thanks to industry, infrastructure, innovation, education, technology, communication networks, and mobility, which is expanding to every corner of the nation and, in fact, the world, it is not only possible, it is impractical to not create such a civics branch if we are going to continue to grow as a nation and as a people. An innovative, socialized network of civic government can give power to the people and deliver them agency to transform the United States into a direct, democratic republic of the United Independence, a first-in-class version of democracy, a true rival and inspiration of all other versions of government, a form of democratic government that is unique and first of its kind. A power of the people to self-govern and create paths for securing self-reliance and autonomy in all areas of their personal jurisdiction is not only an ingenious and brilliant idea, but how can we continue or even think that we can go on without such a precedence set and a vision to move towards? The idea of the setting a precedence for a civics branch will reduce the dependence on government, effectively shrinking the size of the government and the cost of all forms of government, whittling them down to efficient, effective transmitters of governance, an equalizing moderator with authority to address matters through collective governance in matters beyond self-governance. A fourth branch of government would provide a constitutionally sanctioned avenue to address the deeply corrupt manner of representational government. Now, the future of human thriving depends on personally governed organizational infrastructures and systems of living which boost and support elevated standards of living for everyone. Human thriving is a task far too delicate to place only in the mechanism of representational government. While it has its part to play in facilitating common interests, equal opportunity, fairness, and resources of justice through law, the delicate touch of the individual supported by communities of common interest who are charged with the duty and empowered to perform their own independent well-being. This is an important element of civics, is because no one knows better than the individual what they need. What those people need in their lives and how they can lead the life that they want to lead, what they need to do that and how to go about doing that freely and justly, what is required to achieve success in their particular flavor pursuit of happiness can only be determined by the individual. So they must have freedom to express themselves, freedom to live, freedom to be themselves in order to make sure that they are actually able to pursue happiness. And that was something that we promised as a nation that would be provided for all people. Now, the civics branch of government stands for the right for the people to have freedom to live and the life that they choose, a liberty to conduct the life that they see fit, and the safe space to pursue happiness as free and liberated people of independence. What I am proposing here is for us to take back the power of the people through a proportional power of civics. This will require a revolution of sorts. But in my opinion, a revolution doesn't necessarily mean we have to forcibly overthrow some sort of authority, rather just change the way that we are doing this thing we call government. Overall, and in general, the idea of having a centrally focused purpose for government to establish these pillars of integrity so that we can uphold integrity in our mutual benefit, our mutual security, our mutual interests is the establishment that we have to create now moving forward. So where we used to have the tripod of America, the judicial, the legislative, and the executive, adding the civics now gives us 4 strong pillars to uphold the House with integrity. And our Constitution gives us a strong foundation to build upon. Those pillars will give us the standing foundation for us to be able to uphold a roof, to be able to protect us from whatever might befall us in these changing times. What I'm proposing is that by doing this, we're going to eliminate a lot of the problems that we have with government trying to determine the individual's lives. We spend so much time, waste so much time arguing over sordid interests in terms of things that we think are moral obligations of humanity. For instance, people arguing about, protecting life and to try to formalize an identity around protecting life when many of the approaches that government's trying to take actually is a direct violation of one of the most important aspects of the First Amendment, in the determination of the separation, the establishment clause of the separation of state and religion, that the government should not create, or Congress shall not create any law establishing religion. And here we have many forms of representational government actually trying to moralize our personal governance, removing an individual's self-autonomy rights to their own decisions about their own body, and to distinguish a moral bound to limit people's choices of how they're going to pursue their own life happiness. Steeped in a concept that is trying to establish a moral justification. This is creeping very close to an infringement on that basic right of a separation of church and state. And so in this aspect, alleviating things like this, where they're trying to, we have representational government trying to take away personal sovereign autonomy rights of the individual, in order to establish a moral baseline for the governance of people, is trying to establish a connection between church and state. And we already have that established in our Constitution. That's not okay. So instead of continuously arguing over whether that's right or that's wrong, the idea is that the individual is moral and should have their reasonable right to determine for themselves right from wrong. The government can't be anything more than ethical, to say, like, are we doing this in such a way that upholds the integrities of our Constitution? Does it respect the dignity of the individual? Does it align with human dignity? Does it align with human sovereignty? Does it align with human rights? And if the government can't establish themselves as nothing more than the ethical bounds by which we can determine the basis for a person to then choose for themselves what's the moral obligation that they have in their personal life in determining what's right and best for themselves, what's right and best in determination with their relationships with others and the community at large. Those are things that should be left to the individual. And if we think for some reason that they are not capable to discern from themselves what's right or wrong, the only way to correct that is to give them education. We cannot create a forcible bound to limit their options, because ultimately you're limiting their free expression of their self. So what I'm hoping to establish here is the fourth branch of civics is a determining factor that separates representational government from infringing on those individual rights, the insular rights of the individual, who should be able to decide those things for themselves. We don't need the government to come in and dictate what we can and we can't do, as long as our personal choices are aligned with respecting the bounds and the limitations of our choices, and that we're not infringing on other people's choices. Then ultimately we're pursuing the appropriate interests. And if we would like to change the social ontology, how we live our lives and how we go about things, we do that through discourse. We do that through education. We do that through expressing our social and civic responsibilities. We do that through dialogue and communication. That's not something that it should be forced upon us by law. In the limits of a civics branch is effectively to put it off the table for representational government to be able to come in and determine the personal identity of an individual, and to only, again, affect reasonable, fair, just, and reasonable bounds for the ethical approach to making sure that we can live in accord with one another. And if we're no longer wasting our time, effort, and energy in terms of representational government to fight over assorted interests about cultural identity, we can actually have an effective government. our government can do the things that they're supposed to be doing, providing for the common defense, like promoting the general welfare, securing our blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. These are the things that we're supposed to be doing as a collective, and our government is supposed to be the mechanization by which we get that done. And this brings back to the point of why it's super important that we care about the people whom we elect into representational government. Because of the fact that government can't establish morals, only ethical bounds, we have to make sure that the people that we put in those positions are themselves being moral. And not in a sense of being that we need to only vote for those people who believe exactly as we believe, but rather understand that there has to be something about that person, their own personal jurisprudence, to be able to, when necessary, set their sordid interests aside, keep an open mind to the possibilities, not play on notions of fear, and really get down to the basics of, well, what is going to be reasonable, right, just, and fair? What's going to be the right direction moving forward? And what can we do as a collective? Something that will establish not having to create a force of government that conforms people, but rather a welcoming environment for people to be involved and to live in accordance with. It's the idea of a quote by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, which is essentially doggerel sum up, that we need to have if we have a government that is trying to conquer, it's very easy to do that. It's very easy to conquer. But in order to administer, it takes the shoulders of Hercules. That's the doggerel sum up. Essentially saying, sure, we could easily force people to be a certain way and do a certain thing, but it's much more difficult for us to create an administration in which people can, for themselves, administer the, resolution, the remedy for themselves of what to do, because of the fact that representational government's not going to always be there. The people themselves have to be able to make those decisions. And if we are constantly establishing a government that makes them think that they have to look to the government for the answers, and then the law is so complex and so conditioned and, connected with, these different sorted ideas that really have no relationship with one another. We tack on one legislative law with another legislative law in order to get them passed. And then that way they're subverting our own personal choices. Take, for instance, the law that's trying to ban TikTok right now, which in my personal opinion is a gross violation of the First Amendment. And in order to get that through, it's preying on our interests to be able to keep the peace in the world and to be able to, help to support our allies. And by kind of tucking one law in with another law, they're forcing us to accept something conditionally. And I believe that the appropriate way to govern is an unconditional acceptance of just, this is what we should be doing moving forward. And then on top of it, the idea of having everybody on board, the whole collective crew, in agreement that each has their part to play. Everybody has to participate and contribute into society in order to make sure that this vessel of ours stays afloat, which we want to have happen. Because a failed state is no place to be. You can see prime examples of that all across the world right now, where there is infighting and there's conflicts happening because there is no firm basis to hold together the integrity of the people and those who would like to wield power over others. We are in a unique opportunity in America that we have still believe in the Constitution. We still believe in the American intent, of the founding fathers, which established, the we the people. The whole idea of we the people of the United States in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. We ordained the Constitution of the United States, and that has gotten us through for a very long time. Now, bringing an amendment to the Constitution, which allows for us to have a fourth branch of government, will give us the option to have more people involved in government so that the government representation is less necessary and that people themselves can govern themselves. And through the concept of bringing everybody in, now people have skin in the game. They will feel committed to the promise that we're upholding each independently and together in this mutuality of interests. This will help to keep us strong, even in the changing tides, and we have the world kind of like falling apart so that it can come back together. We have a unique opportunity here in America. Our union is still strong. It may be fraying at the edges a little bit, but that's just because it's, the sense that we need to remake ourselves in a new position. We don't have to completely redefine the identity of our country. We just need to reestablish a next step moving forward so we can keep along a continuum and keep moving forward in progress. And progress makes perfect. It's proven by the establishment of our country that has gotten us this far and can continue to take us much further as long as we give ourselves the free space to be able to evolve in that direction, which I believe a fourth branch of civic is going to be able to establish. And having a leader at the helm who understands that and helps to bring that about is crucially important right now. In these changing times of the world, we have to find a way to kind of come together. An innovative government, increasing our intelligence in the world and our connection in the world, and making sure that the people themselves are protected from the government overstepping their bounds, taking away their rights, subverting the rights of the people in order to get their political ideologies to pass. I'm not okay with that outcome. I want the people to be free and independent. And I want the people to be informed and educated so they can make right decisions for themselves. And the best way to, overcome the sordid interests that we have is to establish connectivity, establish communication networks, establish ways to be able to take ideas from this side and ideas from this side and form them together into a union that says, well, look, really our differences are basically looking at the same thing just in different ways. And fundamentally at the core, this is what we're each saying is reasonable. Identify that and move forward. And I honestly believe that one of the basic instruments of a democratic institution is to find a way to connect the pillars of government with one another, to keep the powers separated but interconnected so that they're moving together as one. So you have the executive, which is an individual who represents the person. And then you have the civics branch, which represents the individual, the person. And those two together communicating with one another can move forward saying, as individuals, with independence. This is the way that we see ourselves being able to continue to move along this ontology, this way of living that we've chosen for ourselves. And then you have representational government, which is in the form of Congress and the judicial. And these two are creating the ethical guidelines by which we can govern ourselves, keep ourselves in order and focused and moving along on the directive that the vision of the individual has created. So the individuals are establishing how we're going to move forward, that vision point off in the distance. And then we create the bounds through our legislative and our judicial to make sure that we stay in alignment with that. And I believe that establishing this is not only for the right reasons, in a sense of like it gives us all a reason to get together and work together to make the government work for us, but it also helps us to be able to end a lot of these sordid interests fighting over things that are just keeping us infighting and keeping us from focusing on moving forward. We're at a point of time where right now, in this decade, we are affecting the future. And what we do in this decade is going to make a difference of what we're going to be able to have as possibilities for the next 100 and 200 years. And if we want our country to be able to last for another 250 years, we're going to have to do things now to make sure that it can last that far. In order to do that, we have to have stewardship. We have to understand what it is that we're working towards. We need to have a collective interest to do that. We need to have a separation of powers so that we are all able to, in our own individual independent ways, work towards mutuality so that we can achieve those desirable outcomes that work for the best interests of all people involved. And I believe that establishing a person in the position of the helmsman, the leading executive of the vessel of the United States, that understands the importance of having this separation of powers and establishing it in a legal, precedented way through the constitutional amendment to establish a fourth branch of the government, is somebody who actually wants to give power back to the people. If you have anybody who's trying to mess with the Constitution and try to reinterpret the Constitution in order to give representational government more power and authority over the individual lives of private individuals, that's the wrong direction. We need to be moving in the direction of giving more power to the people, and then empowering the people to be able to make decisions for themselves and informed decisions for themselves, so that together we're all working together instead of having sordid interests pulling us in different directions and tearing us apart at the seams. And if we can all get together in terms of like mutual agreement, just at least on like how we're moving forward, establish the bounds of reasonableness, justness, and fairness, give ourselves the right, take back our rights and our powers for the individual to self-govern, and then put proper intended use for representational government in its place, and no longer let these people and their sordid interests that get elected into these positions just so that they can, wield power and authority over people. Instead, make it so that this is no longer a position that you can exploit to rule over other people. Rather, conform it to an ideology that says, the individual civics are individual people who hold account to representational government. They call out the corruption that's present, and they weed out the unlikelies, who are those who will not conform to the best interest of all people involved. And if we're able to give ourselves the distinguishment of that, no longer will corrupt organizations established within representational government going to somehow be the people who are testing whether or not there's integrity and corruption in the system. It's like the corrupt are trying to weed out the corrupt. It makes no sense. But having the civics branch established, the people themselves can determine, this seems like a corrupt paradigm, and we no longer want to apply that. So we need to remove people from office. We need to understand that we have to create a just bound within this representational government that says you're no longer allowed to do that, and give that power back to the people and say, this is the people's will, this is the people's opportunity, a sovereign, autonomous personhood for the individual, their decision to live their life in pursuit of happiness, and life and liberty in pursuit of happiness are the keystones to our freedom here in America. And if we are allowing the government to constantly take and whittle away the individual rights in order to give it to representational government, we're all just sitting here like, what shall we do? And looking to them for answers, and they can't even get on the same page to be able to pull out the most basic legislation to get stuff done to solve our sordid interests into a solution for the problems that we are actually facing. And there's no reason to hash out the same, repetitive things over and over again. Body autonomy is 100% a part of personal sovereignhood, and the government shouldn't be making determinations about that. It's no longer a question. We shouldn't even be having that discussion anymore. Let's move on to more important things. Understanding the concept of 2A is a responsibility as part of providing for the common defense, but all rights come with responsibilities, and we have to make sure that the people who have weapons are not using them in a way that would disturb the peace, or using it in such a way that would harm the life and liberty in pursuit of happiness for another individual. We have to be able to have that sort of stuff to determine. Well, if we had a fourth branch, civics branch, that said, listen, we can't make legislation unless the people themselves in the civics branch say this is the type of legislation we want to be able to have. And then the representational government says, okay, I hear the voice of the people. This is what they say that they want. We're going to apply that. Instead of having lobbyists come in with their money and their power interests trying to force legislation in a certain way that doesn't necessarily serve the interests of the people, maybe just some corporation that's backing that, push forward and lobbying. Instead, the individual people themselves in the civics branch say, this is what we want to have done. We want to have legislation moving us in this particular direction. Representational government follow through with the legal bounds in order to do that. And the judicial system makes sure that we all live in accordance with that. Simple as that. Now, moving forward, it is one of my greatest ambitions, becoming president of the United States, not because I want to be able to wield power over people, but I want to empower people to be self-governed, self-reliant, self-determined, because that's the future. We need to understand that people themselves are brilliant, intelligent, their human ingenuity is magnificent, their capacity to create is enormous, and we can't limit them by trying to make them fit this little box of conformity representational government does for us. Government is a representation. It is not the will of the people. The will of the people has to have the free space in order to express that. And I want to be able to empower individuals to make those decisions for themselves. So in becoming president of the United States, the first order of business would be to establish that amendment in the Constitution to make space for a civics branch of government so that the people themselves can make decisions for themselves, and we just understand that's how our system works from now on moving forward. And then all of the innovations, the education, the infrastructure, and the sustainable development that's necessary to make that be as it is, as it's meant to be, will all come together to be able to put in the effort, time, effort, energy, contribution, and participation to make that work. And then once we have that established, all we have to do is just play the game that way, continue to move forward in that direction. And then giving ourselves the long-standing continuum of intention to, now that the people have their own personal power, representational government is just bounds that we keep ourselves aligned and in tune with. And then you have a individual executive that respects the sovereignty of the individual, independence of the people, and understands the effectiveness and the necessity of a representational government so that the government represents the will of the individual, the independence that we're upholding. Then all together we can work towards the overarching trajectory of aligning and tuning with an ever more healthy, sustainable, just, and peaceful world by giving ourselves a collective purpose, a national identity, what American identity stands for. And I believe that the best position for us to put ourselves in for now and for future, our posterity, is to establish ourselves as a nation of stewards, to become a collectively responsible for the stewardship of our personal lives, stewardship for our personal homes, stewardship for our communities, and stewardship for our nation, stewardship for civilization, and stewardship for humanity overall. And when we are moving in a direction that understands stewarding these various aspects of our reality, our paradigm of reality, we'll be able to get ourselves to somewhere where we actually want to be. And then we can all understand we're individual, we're independent, we have our own opinions, our own thoughts, our own conditions, our own lifestyles, but we can all come together under that mutuality of understanding of the best interest for everybody involved is for us to be able to steward a positive future moving forward. And so I would like the opportunity to be able to create such a safe space for us to be able to evolve into and involve ourselves with, because there's no reason for us to continue to have this just nasty infighting about differences in opinions or differences in perspectives or positions. And what I propose is a way to say that it's okay to be different. Difference is good, you know. Diversity is massively important. We don't all want to be the same, but we need to have a point of inclusivity. We need to have a point that draws us all together, something that establishes mutual respect for mutual interests and mutual securities moving forward. And I believe by giving our American identity, the identity of a nation of stewards, stewarding people, planet, civilization, humanity, we'll be able to work together towards establishing what sort of projects and what sort of initiatives we're going to take in order to get us to move that direction. And now representational government can help us, well, hey, let's create this type of proposal and give everybody the safe space to be able to build in that space however they can, you know, invest into it so that we can build the next step moving forward, you know, starting with having the first step, the first stone on the pathway moving forward is to give people the civics branch an opportunity for them to self-govern and self-determine. And then the next step is to give us a collective vision of stewardship. And the next step after that is to put forth the proposals that will help us to actually start making that stuff possible, you know, sustainable, expansive development. And then accepting that this all is going to take a leader that is capable of bringing all of these elements together into one unified field of a collective governance. And with that, I thank you for your valuable time, attention, and consideration of everything that I've said. Be well.